There we go.
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. 1 second. Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah Siegel. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with Winifred Frick of Bat Conservation International. Welcome to the show, Winifred.
Thanks, Micah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, why are bats important, and what's with their crazy biology?
Well, bats are important for so many reasons. We usually like to lead with talking about the ways that bats are important because of the valuable ecosystem services that bats provide. So most bats are insectivorous, and all of our insectivorous bats spend a big portion of the night gobbling up nocturnal insects, and some of those insects are crop pests. And so it's been estimated in the billions of dollars, the economic value that bats provide to US farmers. And researchers in Thailand and other parts of the world have also calculated the economic value of bats to rice harvests and to cotton and to other important crops. And then in tropical areas, bats are also important pollinators of different plant species, including some plants that have commercial value because we eat the fruit. So like durian, which is a delicacy in Asia, is pollinated by bats. And then they also are important seed dispersers. So they play an outsized role in terms of moving seeds around and helping tropical rainforests regenerate. But I like to say that one of the reasons that bats are so important, in addition to these ecosystem service roles that they play, is that they're just incredibly fascinating and interesting. And there's lots that we can learn and be inspired by from bats.
I've seen in all the movies with the bats hanging upside down in the cave and then they all whoosh out. So, what's with the hanging?
Well, they fly, right? So bats are mammals. Their body plan isn't too dissimilar from our own. The Latin name for bats is Chiroptera, which literally means hand wing. So their arms, their wings are basically their hands with this like extended membrane to become their flight membrane. And so if you're going to take off to go flying, well, then it's just way easier to do that if you're hanging upside down because you're hanging by your feet and then you're ready to swoop off.
Okay. How did bats evolve?
That's a great question. So bats evolved, I think, over 50 million years ago in the Eocene and evolved the ability to fly. There's currently 1,469 different recognized species of bats. So they're an incredibly diverse group of mammals. They're actually the second most diverse group of mammals, second only to the rodents. And so that's an indicator that they've been incredibly successful in terms of their evolutionary history because they've been able to diversify, and bats are found all over the planet on every continent except for Antarctica. And that ability to fly is like a superpower for bats, and it explains a lot in terms of their biology and ecology and their diversity.
There's a lot of misconceptions about like sharks and big scary animals attacking people like snakes and stuff, but a lot of times that isn't true. Is that the case for bats?
Bats are known to have sort of a bad rap because they are mysterious. They fly at night, and so sometimes people are scared of them because we don't often get to in our everyday lives get to see bats up close. Most people who get to see a picture of a bat with their interesting faces, they'll be like, "Oh, they're actually really cool and fascinating." But there is a lot of fear about bats as well. Unfortunately, they also get a little bit mixed up into the whole like vampire legends because there are three species of bats that are sanguinivorous, which means that they feed on blood. The common vampire bat typically feeds on large mammals, so things like tapirs. They're all found in Central and South America. And that's the only place where they occur in the world. Now, with lots of cattle and livestock, vampire bats will feed a lot on cattle.
They're nocturnal, and it's do they have nocturnal eyes or do they use echolocation or both?
Both, right. So there's a myth that bats are blind, and bats actually are not blind. Bats' vision is, probably pretty similar to ours in a lot of ways, but a lot of bats are hunting insects out of the night sky, and that's kind of hard to do with your eyes. And so they also use echolocation, which is, emitting sound and then listening for the echoes. So a lot of bat species have incredibly large ears and really sensitive hearing to be able to hear the return echoes and be able to identify and locate a insect out of the night sky.
Do you have any bat stories?
I do. There's a bat that is found in Western United States and into Mexico called the pallid bat. And it's my favorite bat because it is famous for eating scorpions, and they're immune to the scorpion venom. And I was working on my PhD down in on the Baja Peninsula in the Sonoran Desert in northwestern Mexico, and we noticed that there's a cactus down there which is called the cardone cactus. So it's a big cactus. It looks a lot like, if you think of Arizona and the classic saguaro cactus of Arizona, the cardone look very similar to that. And those types of cactus are bat pollinated. So they have big white flowers that open up at night, and they offer up a lot of nectar. And the bats, a different species of bat, the lesser long-nosed bat, which is a migratory nectar feeding bat, is the primary pollinator. It comes and visits those flowers at night, and they have really long tongues for slurping up the nectar. And we were down in Baja studying the bats and watching the cactus flowers at night, and we noticed that a different species was coming to visit the flowers, and it turns out it was the pallid bat. So, and pallid bats have really big ears and sort of short muzzles, and they're really adapted for flying low over the desert floor. They actually listen for the sounds of the scorpions scuttling along on the desert floor, and then they'll grab the scorpions and wrestle with them, and they don't mind if they get stung before they crunch them down and eat them. But we discovered that they also like to stick their faces in the cactus flowers and slurp up the nectar. So we did a study where we looked at whether they were good pollinators for the cactus, and it turns out that they deposit a lot of pollen on the stigma of the cactus flowers, in part because they have to shove their faces so far in to reach the nectar, because their faces are more adapted to eating scorpions than to drinking nectar.
So, do bats hibernate, and tell us about the fruit bats?
So a lot of bats hibernate. Bats that live in temperate areas that have long, cold winters hibernate, and that's because they're mammals like we are, and they need to eat a lot to keep their metabolisms going. But in the winter, there's not a lot of insects, and so even though they're mammals, they actually can turn their metabolisms off. I like to say that they can literally chill out, and this saves them a lot of energy because they don't have to be running at their normal operating body temperatures like we do, and so they don't have to eat. And so they go into these extended bouts of torpor where their body temperatures are just above freezing, and that helps them save energy. And they'll do that in cold areas. You might have heard that some of our hibernating bats in the United States have been under threat from a disease called white nose syndrome, which is caused by a fungus. And that fungus actually it's a skin infection. So the bats get exposed to it when they come into hibernation, and then it eats at their skin tissues, and that causes them to change their torpor cycles and arouse too frequently, and then they burn up their valuable fat reserves and then die before spring.
Yeah, how do bats deal with diseases and infections, and do they spread it to humans? Is that a danger?
So right, so white nose syndrome is a fungus disease that is just to bats. Actually, when the bats become active and their metabolisms are up and running, they can actually mount an immune response and fight off the infection. Bats have fascinating immune systems. A lot of you asked earlier about, why should we care about bats? Well, one of the reasons is that we have a lot to learn from bats in terms of the incredible adaptations that they have, because they are more capable of tolerating different kinds of viruses that can be pathogenic in other host organisms. And so I have friends who are researchers who really study exactly how bat immune systems work to help them not get sick from pathogens that make other animals sick.
So tell us about the life cycle and colonies of bats.
In temperate areas, so in places like the US and Europe and temperate Asia, a standard life cycle for bats is that the females emerge in the spring from the places where they're hibernating, and the females will form what we call maternity colonies, and they give where females are grouped together in colonies, and those can be in caves or in trees or sometimes in buildings or bridges because there's not as much natural habitat as there used to be. And the females give birth to one pup per year. And so, like birds, they can have a big clutch because they drop their eggs off and then they go around and fly around and do their businesses. Bats can't do that. They have to carry their pup to term, and so it can get really unwieldy flying around, really pregnant. And so they only have one pup per year. And that means a lot in terms of the ways we think about the ways that bat populations can respond to different kinds of stressors, that they can't just have like bigger litters or more like litters more times per year. They can really only have one pup per year. So anyway, the females give birth usually in early summer when insect populations are really high, and they nurse their young. They live in these colonies. The young typically are ready to fly like 6 to 8 weeks after they're born. That gives them a chance to kind of learn how to fly, learn how to hunt for themselves before fall. And then in fall, the colonies break up and they do a behavior called swarm behavior, where this is actually when the mating occurs. So when females and males come together to mate, and then they find where they're going to spend the winter through hibernation. So some species do migrate, and they'll move latitudinally, like down to warmer areas for the winter. They can also move. We're learning a lot more in terms of the movements of bats now that we can put like little transmitters on bats and see how far they can go and where they go. And in tropical latitudes, that kind of life cycle is a little bit different because the seasons work differently in tropical areas.
Tell us about the story of bats in Africa.
Yeah, so I was part of a field team where we were working on a critically endangered bat called Lamott's roundleaf bat on an isolated mountain range in Guinea in West Africa. It's called the Nimba Mountains. We were there to survey to see where it was living on the mountain, and work to try to protect the remaining roost sites that it was in. And while we were there doing those surveys, we were catching different bats at different times. And we caught this bat that looked like nothing that was in the Bats of Africa book. And it had some features that were like one species and some features that was like a different species. And we were kind of scratching our heads trying to figure out what this might be. And we got in touch with our colleague at the American Museum of Natural History, Dr. Nancy Simmons, and she helped us kind of describe it and look at all of the different features that the bat had that made it its own species. And so we got to name it. We named it Myotis nimbaensis. So it's in the group of Myotis, which is a genus of species that's found kind of around the world. And nimbaensis, it's named for the mountain range that we found it, to give it a sense of where it was from, because it's probably only found on that mountain range in the whole world.
So what do you do at your organization and as research?
Okay. So at Bat Conservation International, I'm the chief scientist. So I lead our team of scientists, and I like to think of the one-line sentence of my job being that we try to identify and answer the questions that help us make sure that no bat species go extinct. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of research questions that we need to answer to make sure that we know how to do that. So we we work a lot on research that helps us find ways to reduce the number of bats that are killed by wind turbines, because unfortunately, a lot of bats are killed by wind turbines. I've done a lot of research on the disease white nose syndrome to try to understand how and why the disease is killing bats and what we can do to help bats survive. We work on implementing endangered species interventions around the world, of making sure that bats that live in caves, those caves are protected, and how we can learn from our conservation actions that we take so that we can make sure that we're taking the best actions possible. So that's, some of that was some of the work that we were doing in Guinea. I got to be part of a expedition to Rwanda where there was a bat called Hill's horseshoe bat that had only ever been detected in Nyungwe National Park in southwestern Rwanda, but it hadn't been seen in 40 years. And so it was one of these species that's considered a lost species because it hadn't been seen in so long, and people were worried that it was extinct. So our African colleagues asked us to come help do a expedition in Nyungwe in Rwanda 5 years ago now. And we set up harp traps, which are a type of trap that they kind of look like a harp because they have monofilament line. And we put them up on the trails. We worked every night, all night, for about 10 days, and we got really, really lucky, and we were able to capture a Hill's horseshoe bat and confirm that the species is still found in Nyungwe National Park in Rwanda. And so we're working with the Nyungwe Rangers and African Parks, which manages the park, to protect the areas that the bat is in.
So, which species are most endangered and why?
I think currently, according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is the kind of the global authority on species status, they publish what that's called the Red List. I think
Yeah.
there's around 23 bat species that are considered critically endangered. That's the highest ranking of endangerment. Um, and those species are kind of found in different parts around the world. There's a couple critically endangered species that we're working to protect in Jamaica that are found only in caves, and we're working to protect those caves from different kinds of threats. Generally, the main threats to bats include habitat loss or habitat degradation. A lot of bat species, the bat diversity peaks in the tropics, and so all of the stressors and threats to the rainforest, like deforestation, are major threats to bats. Bats that live on islands can be really threatened because islands are vulnerable to extreme weather and extreme storms, and also habitat loss. And there's just like less space for them. Wind turbines are also one of the major emerging threats to bats around the world.
Well, do you have numbers on wind turbines?
Yes. So we know, unfortunately, wind turbines kill a lot of bats. Our best estimates right now is that probably well over 1 million bats are killed by wind turbines a year. In the U.S., I think our estimates right now are upwards of around over 500,000 bats a year are killed by wind turbines.
Can you tell us about wet markets?
Live or like wildlife markets in Asia are places in which wild animals can be sold for food consumption. And if those places aren't regulated, and if there aren't ways of making sure that proper hygiene protocols are followed, they can be areas of potential high risk for zoonotic spillover. Zoonotic spillover being when a wild animal has a virus that can become pathogenic, and other hosts, including humans, can jump from their natural reservoir host into another species. And because oftentimes in live wildlife markets, animals are caged and in close proximity to each other. That provides an opportunity. When animals get stressed, they tend to shed viruses more. And so if you've got different kinds of animals stacked on top of each other, they can be shedding virus, and they can jump from one host to another host. And then if animals are getting slaughtered and prepared for human consumption, then they can come into contact with people and then get into the human population.
Tell us about the smallest and the biggest bats.
The biggest bat is one of the bats that we call a flying fox, which it has like over like a 6 foot wingspan. These bats actually tend to like hang out in trees. They don't echolocate. They have really big eyes, and they're incredibly cool, and very big. And as someone who works primarily on smaller bats, it's like kind of blows my mind to think about a bat that big. And then the bumblebee bat, which is found in Asia, I think is the smallest bat on record.
So, how are bats adapted to cities?
Well, so some species can be quite flexible and they can roost in, I actually have bats living in the eaves of my house. So the little crevices of in people's like, eaves and things can be like, I know, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
this that. Can provide nice little habitats for bats. Bats can live in bridges. The fact that they can fly gives them, a chance to be able to kind of maybe navigate over areas that would be harder if you were a terrestrial mammal to get through. And then they can take advantage of green spaces within cities. Most of our bats here in the U.S. are insectivorous, and so they're looking for insect populations. So we do worry a little bit about what's called the insect apocalypse in terms of the reduction of insects in around the world, really. But and a lot of bats drink water, and so most bats need good foraging areas. They need access to good clean water to be able to drink on the wing. They actually swoop down and sip water um, off the surface. So like if you have a pond nearby, you can go out around sunset and hopefully see some bats skimming the surface. Now, if you do that and you're out watching and you see bats kind of alighting on the water, either like on a still section of a river or over a pond, there's probably two things you're seeing. One is you're seeing bats take a drink. And then the other is some bats will forage for insects right over the water, and they actually gaff them with their feet, kind of like an osprey grabs fish. So rather than grabbing with their mouths, most bats actually grab insects out of the night sky with their feet, and then they have a tail membrane between their legs that they can use like a mitt. And then they will grab the insect out of their tail membrane while they fly. And that's why bats look a little bit sporadic while they're flying, because they're actually honing in on an insect, and then they're grabbing that insect with their feet and their tail membrane, and then they're grabbing the insect out of it and eating it on the wing. But yeah, some bats are really good at being able to live in cities, and others need more like bigger stretches of natural habitat and will only be like in caves or in big old trees.
What do you predict for bats for the next 30 years from now?
Yeah, so our recent State of the Bats report for North America shows that the experts are concerned that 52% of bat species in North America are at risk of severe population declines in just the next 15 years. Um, and that and then 98% of bat species have lost key habitats and are threatened by human land uses. So those are some of the statistics that we have just from North America in terms of the way the experts are worried. But there are some positive signs. So there are species that we have shown that we can recover. So like the lesser long-nosed bat was removed from the Endangered Species Act a number of years ago because populations had recovered. The gray bat, which is still listed as an endangered species in the US, but its populations have been steadily recovering since it received that protection. And so we know that when we put legal protections in place and we focus on conservation actions that help bats, that it can make a difference and that bat populations can respond and we can help bats.
Do you think we'll lose some species in the next 30 years?
I hope not, because it's my job to make sure that doesn't happen. But we're really worried about species like the northern long-eared bat, which is one of the species that's been heavily impacted by white nose syndrome. We've lost 99% of the known population of that species. So it's going to take a lot of effort to make sure that that species doesn't completely disappear. It recently was listed as endangered in the US, so that it does give it the legal protection and some focus to make sure that we can do everything we can to help it. Like I said, I think there's over 20 species right now that are listed as critically endangered around the world. And so that's a lot of work to do to make sure that we can see those species have a chance of being here in 30 years.
What can people do to help?
There's lots that people can do. So there's things that you can do as an individual in terms of always being a bat fan helps in terms of raising awareness for the importance of bats and bat conservation and telling friends and family just how important they are. That helps share the attention and the and sort of the passion and mission. People who live in places you can we like to advocate for bat gardening, which is basically ways in which you can garden in your own backyard to make sure that you're using native plants and not using pesticides that could help increase your local insect populations like moths and things that are bat food. And then also giving to organizations that work specifically on bat conservation, like the organization I work for. That sounds a little self-serving, but really helping folks who are able to invest in conservation actions around the world probably is has the greatest impact over just like individual things that you could do in your own backyard.
Thank you for talking with me, Winifred, and thank you for watching. You can help animals by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. I'll see you next time on Nature's Guardians. Bye.